The hospital is silent. A barefoot boy, maybe 12, limps through the corridors, clutching something small, wrapped in a threadbare cloth. He walks past security like he owns the place, and no one stops him. He knows exactly where he's going. He stops in front of room 9. The door swings open, almost as if someone has been waiting for him. Inside, a man named Richard, a Millionaire CEO, sits by his daughter's bedside, red-eyed, trembling, utterly spent. His daughter, Lily, lies in a coma, hooked to machines. The hum of the ventilator, the steady blink of the monitors, the smell of antiseptic. The boy steps in. He unfolds the cloth. He whispers,
"Who are you?"
I want to help your daughter to be fine again. Just turn off the machine and she will wake up.
Everything freezes. Richard collapses into his chair. His wife, Elaine, gasps under her breath. The nurse's hand trembles. The doctor goes pale. The world narrows to that moment. How had it come to this? Who was this boy? And why did he know a secret the adults refused to believe? Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Richard thought he had everything in his life under control. Billion-dollar deals, flashy cars, power suits. But now, sitting beside Lily's bed, all that mattered was whether his little girl would ever open her eyes again. Doctors had given up hope. Her brain injury was severe, and everyone assumed this was as good as it would get. Then the boy appeared. His name was Ethan, and he said he had known Lily since she was born. He claimed something deeply personal, that Lily could still hear, even in her coma. He said he remembered her favorite lullaby, the one her mother used to hum softly at night. He told Richard to turn off the machines. He swore, with the calm of someone who had nothing to lose, that Lily would wake if they did. Richard, desperate and broken, refused at first. "That's ludicrous," he told Ethan. "We can't just shut off her life support on a child's word." Elaine, his wife, was shaking. She had already braced herself for the worst. The doctors, in their crisp white coats, exchanged worried glances. But Ethan didn't back down. He sat beside Lily's bed, his bare feet on the cold floor, and he began to speak, softly, intimately, about memories only a child could know. He told stories of childhood birthdays, of the time Lily pasted frosting all over her cheeks, of her shy laugh when she thought no one was watching. Ethan's voice shook sometimes, and once he closed his eyes, as though he was calling something from a place no one else could reach. Richard leaned in. He watched Ethan's lips move. He felt a flicker in his chest, hope, perhaps. And then, as in slow motion, a nurse lifted a finger from Lily's arm. Her hand twitched, the monitors flickered, the hum of the ventilator seemed to soften. Richard's heart pounded in his ears. Elaine gasped. The doctor froze mid-step. But then, just as suddenly, Ethan stopped speaking. He closed the cloth wrap, whatever it held, and stood. He whispered once more, "She's going to wake up," and turned to leave. He didn't say more. He didn't explain how he knew. He just walked out. And in the dead silence that followed, Lily's monitor flatlined. How did we get here? Who was Ethan really? And what dark truth was hiding behind Lily's coma? Richard Whitmore had spent his entire life solving impossible problems. Boardrooms, markets, empires, he conquered them all with numbers, logic, and cold precision. But nothing had prepared him for the moment his 9-year-old daughter, Hannah, collapsed in their backyard one quiet afternoon. No warning, no cry for help, just a fall, a stillness, and then a silence that never ended. For months now, Richard had been living in hospital corridors, surviving on coffee and guilt, staring at machines that breathed for his child. He was a millionaire, yes, but none of his wealth could buy the one thing he wanted. The sound of Hannah's voice saying, "Dad," one more time. He felt broken, stripped of everything except the determination to keep her alive, no matter what it cost him. Veronica, his wife, Hannah's stepmother, stood at his side, but her presence carried a tension Hannah never deserved. Veronica was meticulous, polished, always speaking in controlled tones, like every word was rehearsed. She acted the part of the grieving stepmother, offering tissues and cold reassurance, but there was a distance in her eyes, something cautious, something calculating. Richard had tried for months to push the thought away, to remind himself that stress did strange things to people. But the way Veronica hovered near the machines, the way she pushed doctors to let science handle it, always sent a shiver up his spine. It was as if she was guarding something, or someone. Then there was Dr. Harlan Pierce, the family doctor who had cared for Hannah since she was a toddler. Highly respected, decades of experience, hands steady, voice deep, reputation spotless. Yet the moment Hannah slipped into her coma, Dr. Pierce had grown strangely insistent about keeping her connected to life support around the clock. Every time Richard asked about experimental therapies, alternative opinions, or stepping outside their state for treatment, Dr. Pierce calmly shut it down. "The machines are the only thing keeping her alive," he would say, almost rehearsed. "Disconnect them, and you lose her." His words were final, heavy, almost too certain. But Richard had a feeling, a quiet, persistent instinct that something was wrong beneath all the professional pauses. He couldn't explain it, but every time he walked into room 9, he felt watched. Not by people, but by the truth hiding behind their words, a truth nobody wanted him to find. And then came the moment that chilled Richard to his core, a moment he never revealed to anyone. It happened late one evening as he sat beside Hannah, humming the lullaby she loved when she was little. For just a second, less than a heartbeat, Hannah's fingers curled around his hand, gently, weakly, like a whisper. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips moved without sound. She had woken up before, briefly, silently, when no one was looking. And Richard knew someone did not want her waking again. In the days after Samuel first appeared, Richard began noticing things he could no longer explain away. It started with the machines. The monitors that had been steady for months suddenly flickered whenever certain people entered room 9. When Veronica stepped inside, Hannah's oxygen levels dipped, almost as if her body recognized something it feared. But when Samuel's name was spoken, even quietly, even in passing, Hannah's fingers twitched under the blanket. Not enough to call a miracle, not enough to convince a medical board, but enough for a father who knew his child every tiny habit. Richard tried telling Dr. Pierce about the changes, but the doctor dismissed it immediately, calling it involuntary muscle activity. He spoke with the cool certainty of someone who didn't want to consider any alternative. But Richard heard something else beneath his tone, a subtle irritation, as if the possibility of improvement annoyed him. The nurses began whispering too. One evening while Richard sat beside Hannah's bedside, he overheard two of them in the hallway. Their voices were low, cautious. They mentioned a strange argument they had witnessed between Veronica and Dr. Pierce. Something about timing, something about keeping things stable, something about Samuel's unexpected presence. The moment the nurses saw Richard, they stopped talking, their silence sharper than the words they had tried to hide. Later, another nurse approached him privately. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke. She said she had seen Samuel in the hospital before, weeks before, wandering the pediatric wing, lingering outside room 9, watching Hannah with an expression that wasn't fear or sadness, but familiarity. Strangely, no one had logged his visits, no one remembered checking him in, no one even remembered speaking to him. But if Samuel had been there before, the nurse whispered, why didn't anyone remember him? That question burrowed deep into Richard's mind, refusing to let him rest. And soon, more clues surfaced. One afternoon, as Richard sat beside his daughter telling her stories from home, Samuel's name slipped into his voice. "Samuel says, you love the color blue." Hannah's eyelids fluttered again, just once, but enough for Richard to lean forward in disbelief. When Samuel visited again, he quietly finished one of Hannah's favorite bedtime stories, a story Richard had never told anyone outside their home. Samuel recited details that belonged to only Hannah's childhood, the kind of memories no stranger could know. When Richard asked him how he knew such things, Samuel simply lowered his gaze and said, "She remembers more than you think." Veronica's reaction to Samuel's name grew more frantic with each passing hour. The moment she heard it spoken, her face tightened, her hands shook. She snapped at nurses, demanded they keep that boy away from room 9, and insisted that Richard stop encouraging his visits. But her panic didn't make sense. She had never met Samuel. She had no reason to fear him, unless she feared what he knew. Unless she feared what Hannah might reveal if she ever woke up again. One evening, Richard watched her pace the hallway, whispering urgently into her phone, glancing over her shoulder as if she expected Samuel to appear at any moment. When she noticed Richard observing her, she forced a stiff smile, but her eyes betrayed a terror she couldn't hide. Piece by piece, the story was shifting. The things Richard once ignored were now impossible to unsee. The machines reacting to people, Hannah responding to Samuel's name, the doctor and Veronica sharing conversations they didn't want overheard, Samuel appearing in the hospital weeks before anyone admitted it, a drawing only a child who knew Hannah could have made. And then came the moment that tightened Richard's chest with cold realization. A moment that suggested Samuel wasn't just connected to Hannah, he might have been trying to protect her long before the adults knew danger existed. And this next part would change everything. Richard had always believed the greatest threats in life came from the outside. Unexpected accidents, cruel coincidences, the randomness of tragedy. But the longer he stayed in that hospital, the more he realized something far more unsettling. The danger was already inside the walls he trusted. It began with Veronica, the woman he had married 2 years after Hannah's mother passed away. She had stepped into their lives promising stability, offering kindness that felt real at the time, and Richard, grieving and overwhelmed, had accepted it. But now, as Hannah lay unresponsive, Veronica's mask began to slip in small ways that Richard couldn't ignore. She spoke about medical bills more often than she spoke about hope. She reminded Richard, too calmly, of the insurance policy Hannah's biological mother had set aside for her. She mentioned inheritance paperwork at times that made no emotional sense. Her discomfort at Samuel's presence now seemed less like fear and more like exposure. The truth, quietly taking shape in Richard's mind, was devastating. Veronica didn't want Hannah to wake up because a conscious, healthy Hannah meant complications, financially, emotionally, and personally. With Richard drowning in grief, Veronica had positioned herself as the anchor of the family, the one who knew what was best. But if Hannah woke up and spoke, if she remembered certain things or told stories that Richard had never heard, that fragile power Veronica held might crumble. And worst of all, the life insurance meant for Hannah's future was only accessible if Hannah remained in long-term care. Veronica didn't dare say it out loud, but Richard could feel it in the way she pressed him to prepare for the inevitable. Dr. Pierce, meanwhile, had wrapped himself in the authority of his title, hiding behind charts and jargon. But Richard had been watching him closely now. The doctor's insistence on the machines, his refusal to seek second opinions, and the way he hovered near Veronica during their whispered conversations left questions too heavy to dismiss. One day, when Dr. Pierce's door left slightly ajar, Richard overheard him on the phone. Words like file delay, keep it consistent, and no, he can't know drifted through the narrow gap. Richard froze, listening. He couldn't make out every sentence, but the tone, a mix of irritation and urgency, was unmistakable. Later that same evening, a nurse quietly slipped Richard an envelope she wasn't supposed to have seen.
Inside was a scan from weeks earlier, showing neural activity that contradicted Dr. Pierce's claims. It suggested that Hannah had responded to certain stimuli, but the test had been marked as inconclusive and buried. The pieces began to fall into place. Dr. Pierce wasn't just wrong, he was hiding something deliberately. Perhaps it was fear of losing his reputation. Perhaps something financial. Perhaps an arrangement with Veronica to maintain their version of the truth. Whatever the reason, the doctor's calm certainty now felt like the most dangerous lie of all. And Richard, broken by worry, had allowed himself to trust the very people who were quietly shaping the outcome they wanted. He had been manipulated by their confidence, their professional tone, their rehearsed reassurances. They made him doubt his own instincts, made him question whether he was seeing patterns or simply drowning in grief. The thought that he might lose Hannah twice, first to the coma and then to his own misguided trust, created a fear so deep he could barely breathe. But through all this, Samuel remained steady. He was the only one who spoke softly, without agenda, without fear. The only one Hannah seemed to recognize in some instinctive way. The only one who acted like her life mattered simply because she existed. And in that contrast, Richard felt the truth he had been avoiding begin to sharpen. The danger did not come from a mysterious boy walking barefoot into a hospital room, but from the adults standing closest to him. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones standing closest to you. Samuel returned to the hospital 3 nights later, and there was no pretending he was just a lost boy wandering in by accident. Security cameras caught his small figure slipping through the side entrance moments before the doors sealed for the evening, moving through dim hallways with a confidence no child his age should have. He avoided every guard with an ease that made the staff reviewing the footage feel unsettled. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance at room numbers, didn't ask for help. He moved through the corridors like someone retracing steps he had taken countless times before. The night shift nurse swore she heard nothing, yet the cameras showed him brushing past her station like he was invisible. He found Hannah's room again and walked straight to her bedside and placed his hand gently on hers with a familiarity that pierced the silence. And the moment his skin touched hers, the heart monitor shifted, rising with a flutter that made Richard jolt awake, breath caught in his throat, unable to understand how a boy with no medical training and no reason to know Hannah could predict the one thing the machines had failed to show for months. Richard stared as the faint but undeniable change on the monitor continued, a rhythm that responded to Samuel like he was someone Hannah trusted, someone she recognized even through the fog of her coma. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. Hannah's heartbeat steadied, growing stronger the longer Samuel held her hand. Richard tried to ask how he knew she would react that way, but Samuel didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on Hannah, soft and aching, like he was remembering something only the two of them shared. The air in the room seemed to shift, not with hope, but with the realization that nothing about this boy was coincidence. He didn't wander into the hospital at random. He didn't stumble into room 9 by luck. He didn't guess which hallway led to her door. He moved like someone who had been searching for her all along. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't lucky. He knew her. Richard waited until the monitor steadied and the room fell quiet again before he finally asked Samuel the question that had been clawing at him since the boy first appeared. "How do you know my daughter?" For a long moment, Samuel didn't answer. He kept his eyes on Hannah, tracing her fingers with a gentleness that didn't belong to a stranger. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, threaded with memories he had carried alone for so long. He told Richard the truth Hannah had never shared, not with his father, not with Veronica, not even with Dr. Pierce. Months before the coma, Hannah had been volunteering at a small community shelter downtown. She did it quietly, slipping out with a backpack full of books, saying she was working on a school project. She went there because she wanted to help children who didn't have the same safety she did, children like Samuel. Over time, the two of them formed a bond that made her visits the highlight of his days. Hannah taught him to read using old storybooks she found at yard sales. She made him laugh when the world felt heavy, and when older kids tried to push him around, Samuel stepped in front of her without thinking, refusing to let anyone hurt her. They weren't just friends, they were each other's safe place. One evening, as they sat on the shelter steps, Hannah had told Samuel that if anything bad ever happened to her, he had to come find her. She said she didn't know why she felt like she needed to say it, only that she trusted him. She asked him to promise, and Samuel, looking at the girl who treated him like he mattered long before anyone else did, gave him his word. When Richard heard this, his heart cracked open. His daughter, the child he tried desperately to protect, had been protecting someone else, and she had been keeping that part of her life hidden, not out of shame, but out of fear that he wouldn't approve. But Samuel wasn't finished. He turned to Richard, eyes filled with a sorrow that didn't belong on a child's face, and whispered something that made the room feel colder. Samuel said that the machines aren't helping her. They're stopping her. Richard stepped back, stunned. Every instinct inside him rebelled against the idea, but he couldn't deny what he had seen with his own eyes. Hannah responded to Samuel's voice, not the machines, not the treatments, not the routines Dr. Pierce insisted were necessary. Samuel explained that Hannah had woken up once weeks ago when he spoke to her. Her fingers had tightened around his. She had opened her eyes, barely, trying to form his name. But at that exact moment, Dr. Pierce had entered the room, and as he adjusted the machines, Hannah slipped back into stillness. Samuel's hands shook. He said he didn't understand the medical details. He was just a kid, but he knew what he had seen. He knew that whenever the machines increased their control, Hannah became unresponsive, and whenever human touch or familiar voices reached her, she tried to fight back. Richard felt something deep inside him shift, a terrible suspicion forming at the edges of his grief. And then Samuel said the words that shattered everything Richard believed about what had happened to his daughter. Before the coma, Hannah had confided in him. She told Samuel she felt watched at home. She said she was scared to be alone with someone she didn't fully trust. She said she had overheard conversations that didn't make sense. And she said if anything ever happened to her, anything at all, Samuel needed to remember her promise. But what he revealed next shattered everything Richard believed. If you're still here and following the story, comment, "I'm still here." Let's see who's watching this far.
Richard stood frozen, the weight of Samuel's words pressing on him like a rising tide. For months, he had trusted the doctor, trusted the machines, trusted the structure and order of the hospital system that was supposed to keep his daughter safe. But as Samuel slowly revealed the truth he had pieced together, truth no adult had bothered to see, the walls of certainty around Richard's mind began to crumble. It began with the medical reports. Dr. Pierce had always insisted Hannah's condition was a rare neurological collapse, something unpredictable, untreatable, irreversible. But Samuel, during his quiet slips into the hospital, had overheard conversations he didn't fully understand at the time. He had seen Dr. Pierce shredding papers, whispering urgently with Veronica in the hallway, stuffing files into a locked drawer. One night when Samuel hid near the supply closet, waiting for a chance to sneak into room 9, he heard a nurse crying softly. She said she had tried to report something, but it wasn't safe, and they made sure I wouldn't be believed. By morning, she wasn't on the schedule anymore. Her locker had been emptied, her badge deactivated. No explanation, no goodbye. Piece by piece, Richard saw the picture forming. Hannah's illness wasn't random. It wasn't fate. It wasn't some tragic twist the world had thrown at him. It was caused, slowly, quietly, by the wrong medication. A medication Veronica insisted on. A medication Dr. Pierce approved without question and increased even when Hannah showed signs of reacting badly. The symptoms aligned perfectly. Dizziness, fatigue, nausea, all written off as stress by Dr. Pierce. And then the sudden collapse, the coma, the machines, the silence. Richard felt sick. He remembered Veronica standing over Hannah's bedside, reminding him again and again that the medication was necessary. He remembered Dr. Pierce telling him he was being emotional, that he needed to trust the professionals. He remembered signing forms he barely had the strength to read. And now the truth was staring him in the face. The two people he trusted most in that hospital were the ones who had led Hannah into this nightmare. Samuel took a quiet breath, then reached into the worn cloth he always carried pressed against his chest. Inside was a small toy, a faded little figure with chipped paint and a missing ear. It was simple, worn from years of handling, but Richard recognized it instantly. It was Hannah's favorite. She carried it everywhere when she was younger. She slept with it, ate with it, used it as her imaginary friend. She once said the toy made her feel brave, and now Samuel held it like it was the last piece of a broken promise he was trying desperately to keep. "She gave this to me. The last day I saw her awake. She said if I ever needed to remind her who she was, to use this." Richard didn't know what to expect next. He watched as Samuel stepped to the side of the bed, his hand shaking slightly as he placed the small toy into Hannah's palm. Her fingers were cold and still. The room was silent. And then, in an instant that struck Richard harder than any words could, the heart monitor flickered, first subtly, then unmistakably. The rhythm shifted, a tiny spike, a rapid flutter, a tremor of response that had nothing to do with machines and everything to do with memory. Samuel leaned closer, whispering her name like a prayer. And suddenly, her heart rate changed. Richard had always believed that pain came from the outside, from strangers, from fate, from accidents, but on this night, the truth came from the walls of the hospital itself. He didn't mean to overhear it. He was simply walking past an office door when he heard his wife's voice, cold, controlled, terrifyingly calm. Veronica wasn't crying, she wasn't worried, she was planning. Her and Dr. Pierce whispering about timing, about managing the situation, about keeping Hannah unconscious just long enough. And in that moment, reality hit Richard like a knife to the chest. The woman he trusted, the doctor he believed, were the very people keeping his daughter trapped between life and death. He felt the room tilt. He felt his knees weaken. He felt something break inside him, something he didn't know could ever heal. But the worst part wasn't what they said. It was that they said it with no guilt, no hesitation, no shame. When Richard stepped back, breath trembling, he turned and there stood Samuel, watching him quietly. And the boy, with eyes too knowing for his age, whispered, "She tried to tell you, sir. Months ago, she whispered your name." Then came the nurse, the one who had been fired, silenced, erased. Hands shaking, voice cracking, she confessed everything. The medication that wasn't supposed to be given, the report she tried to file, the fear she swallowed every day. And right then, Richard understood. The truth wasn't just painful. It wasn't just betrayal. It was criminal. Richard stood there broken, shaking, but no longer afraid. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't listening to doctors or paperwork or the woman who'd whispered poison into his life. He was listening to the truth. With a voice stripped raw with grief, he said the words that froze the entire room. "Turn them off." The doctor refused, his voice rising, excuses spilling out like oil. Veronica lunged towards Richard, her mask cracking into pure fury. Even security moved in, unsure of who to obey. But Richard didn't back down, not this time. And then Samuel stepped forward, small, steady, fearless, in a room full of adults losing control. He placed his hand gently over Hannah's hand. No hesitation, no fear. And he whispered, "Hannah, I'm here. Wake up, please." The machines slowed. The beeping softened. The room fell into a silence so heavy it was almost painful. Seconds stretched into forever. Her heart rate dropped, then steadied, then a flat line. Hope drained from the room, breaths held, hands covered mouths. Richard felt his soul collapse inward. And then, just when everyone thought it was over, a twitch. The smallest flicker of life. Hannah's fingers moved. Her eyelids trembled, lifted, and the world changed. She looked at Samuel, not confused, not afraid, but like she had been waiting for him. And with a breath as soft as a prayer, she whispered his name. Hannah's eyes were open, and in that instant, every lie in the room began to crumble. Samuel's knees buckled first, the boy who carried the truth farther than any adult dared. Exhaustion finally claimed him, and he collapsed into the arms of a nurse who rushed to help. Richard didn't hesitate. For the first time in months, he held his daughter, warm, breathing, alive, and the weight he'd been carrying shattered into dust. The doctor tried to speak, tried to explain, but Richard's voice cut through him like thunder. "You're done here." Veronica's mask broke next. Fear flushed across her face as the truth spilled out. Every secret she'd buried now dragged into the light. Police were called. No more hiding, no more control. The nurse who had once been silenced, the only one brave enough to question the darkness, was brought back with honor, tears in her eyes. And then Hannah wrapped her arms around her father's neck, pulled him close, and whispered with a voice reborn, "You listened. I knew you would." Because in the end, love is louder than lies. And truth always finds a way. And now, as the dust settles and the truth finally breathes in the open, there's one question left to hold in your heart. If you were Hannah's father, would you have believed Samuel? Take a moment. Think about it, because sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. And if this story touched you, hit the like button, share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories every single day.